The high mountain winds of Bodie, California, carried the scent of dust and broken dreams in the autumn of 1882. Inspired by real historical conditions in the American West, this is an AI-assisted fictional story created for storytelling and entertainment. Some scenes include prejudice and intimidation, but no graphic violence is depicted. It was a town built on gold and grit. But the loneliest soul in Bodie wasn't digging for gold. She was quietly baking cornbread in the back of a crowded kitchen, and before autumn was over, one rancher would ask a question that changed her entire life. Bodie was not a place for the faint of heart. Mei Lin was a ghost in this town of shadows. She worked in the humid, cramped kitchen of Miller's Rest. While the miners shouted and the piano player hammered out tinny tunes next door, Mei Lin moved with the silence of falling snow. She was 24 years old, but her eyes held the heavy weight of 1,000 years. She always wore a high-collared dress of deep purple silk. It was a final gift from her mother before the long, terrifying voyage from Canton. The silk was frayed at the edges now. It was much like her spirit, worn thin by the harshness of the American West. In Bodie, being Chinese meant being invisible at best, and a target at worst. The year 1882 had brought a cold, sharp change to the air. In May, President Chester A. Arthur had signed the Chinese Exclusion Act into law. It was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States. It cast a long, dark shadow over every Chinese soul in the country. For Mei Lin, it meant the gates of the world had slammed shut. She stayed in the kitchen because the world outside was often too loud and far too cruel. She spent her days leaning over a hot cast iron stove. Her hands were calloused by the blistering heat and the constant scrubbing. Most of the men who ate at Miller's Rest never even saw her face. They saw only the plates of salt pork and beans that appeared through the small serving window. They didn't care who cooked the food as long as it was hot. They didn't care whose heart was breaking in the steam as long as the price was cheap. But Silas Thorne was not like most men. Silas was a rancher from the valley below, a man who had seen 50 hard winters. He had buried a wife to the fever and buried his dreams in the dry earth long ago. He was a man of few words and a steady, rhythmic heart. He came to Bodie once a month for supplies. He always stopped at Miller's Rest for a midday meal. On this particular afternoon, the air was crisp and biting. The sun was setting early behind the jagged purple peaks of the Sierras. The dining room was full of rough-handed men, smelling of sweat and earth. Mei Lin had decided to make something special that day. She had a small, secret stash of cornmeal. She had a jar of honey she had traded for in the hidden corners of the Chinese quarter. She mixed it with a pinch of ginger and a dash of cream from a local dairy. When the cornbread came out of the oven, it glowed like the gold everyone was digging for in the hills. It was soft. It was sweet. It smelled of a home she barely remembered across the Pacific. She sliced a thick, steaming piece. She placed it on a tin plate next to a bowl of beef stew. She pushed the plate through the window. It landed softly in front of Silas Thorne. Silas took a bite. The noise of the dining room drifted away. The warm sweetness lingered on his tongue. For the first time since burying his wife, something inside him softened. It wasn't just bread. It tasted like peace. The chaos of the saloon faded into the background. He looked at the golden bread, glowing in the dim light. Then he looked up at the small window. He saw a pair of dark, intelligent eyes watching him from the darkness. Mei Lin tried to look away, her heart racing, but Silas raised his hand, a gesture of quiet respect. "Excuse me, miss," he called out. His voice was a low, steady rumble that cut through the noise of the room. The dining room went quiet. Rough miners turned to look at the man who was actually talking to the kitchen help. Mei Lin stepped slowly to the window, Her purple silk dress shimmered faintly in the flickering lamplight. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Her English was careful, soft, and melodic. Silas held up the piece of cornbread. "I've eaten bread from San Francisco to St. Louis," he said, "but I've never tasted anything that felt like a prayer before. Where did you learn to bake like this?" Maylin felt a heat rise in her cheeks. It had nothing to do with the heat of the stove. "My father was a baker in the city," she said softly. "He told me that if you put peace into the dough, the person who eats it will find rest." Silas looked at her properly then. He saw the exhaustion in her frame. He saw the quiet dignity in her posture that no amount of hardship could break. "Well, I've been looking for rest for a long time, Miss Maylin," he replied, "and I think I just found a piece of it right here." The miners laughed and went back to their grumbling and drinking, but Silas stayed. He watched her move back to the stove. For the first time in many years, he felt a spark of something other than duty. He felt a spark of hope. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to tell me where you are watching from. I love hearing about the beautiful places my listeners call home. Please subscribe so you never miss a tale of the Old West. Over the next several weeks, Silas came to Miller's Rest whenever he could. He didn't care about the gold in the mountains anymore. He cared about the quiet woman in the kitchen. Sometimes he brought her small things from his ranch in the valley: a sprig of wild lavender that smelled of the open range, a handful of fresh apples, crisp and red. Sometimes he quietly left a silver coin beneath his empty bowl. He always pretended it was an accident. Maylin always knew it wasn't. He told her stories about the eagles that nested near his cabin. Maylin began to look for him through that small window. She started to wear a small, bright ribbon in her dark hair. Her smiles became less of a rarity and more of a light. But Bodhi was a place where light often attracted the darkest souls. The following scene contains non-graphic harassment and intimidation based on historical prejudice. A group of young miners was fueled by whiskey and the hateful rhetoric of the Exclusion Act. They decided they didn't like the rancher talking to the quiet girl. They cornered Maylin one evening. She was walking toward the Chinese Quarter after her long shift. The wind was howling through the wooden slats of the buildings. The air was freezing, biting at her skin. "You think you're better than us because the rancher likes your bread?" one man sneered. His breath smelled of cheap rye and malice. He reached out and grabbed the sleeve of her purple silk dress. The delicate silk ripped with a sharp, heartbreaking sound. It wasn't just a dress. It was the last piece of fabric her mother had ever sewn with her own hands. Maylin didn't scream. She stood her ground, though her heart hammered like a frightened bird against her ribs. She looked the man straight in the eye, with a quiet courage that should have shamed him. Her trembling fingers closed tightly around the torn piece of silk. For one terrifying moment, she thought she was about to lose the last piece of home she had left. Before the man could lay another hand on her, a heavy shadow fell over the alley. Silas Thorne stepped into the flickering lantern light. He didn't draw a gun. He simply stood there, his presence like an unmovable mountain of granite. "That's enough, boys," Silas said. His voice was flat, calm, and incredibly dangerous. "She's a lady, and you're acting like curs." The miners grumbled, looking at the floor. They knew Silas was a man who didn't miss his mark. They scattered into the darkness like rats fleeing the light. Silas walked over to Maylin. He saw the jagged tear in her mother's silk dress. It was the only thing she had left of her past. He took off his heavy wool coat. He draped it gently over her trembling shoulders. For the first time in years, someone covered her with kindness instead of fear. The coat smelled of pine needles, leather, and honesty. "I'm sorry, Maylin," he whispered, his eyes full of pain for her. "No one should have to pay a price for being gentle." "This world is a hard, jagged place for a gentle soul." Maylin looked up at him, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Why do you help me, Mr. Thorne? she asked. "Everyone else looks through me like I am made of glass." Silas lifted his hand, then stopped, careful not to frighten her. "Because I see you, Maylin," he said. "I see the woman who brings peace to a room just by being in it, and I don't want to see you behind a kitchen window anymore." That night, they sat on the wooden steps of the eatery. They talked until the stars turned cold and the moon hung high. The cold weather settled in quietly. Silas repaired the loose fence behind the kitchen. Maylin mended the torn lining of his old coat. Neither of them spoke about love. They simply kept showing up for each other. Silas told her about his ranch in the valley. He spoke of the green grass and the water that tasted like melted snow. He told her about the loneliness that had settled into his bones like a winter frost. Maylin told him about the family she had lost to the sea and the sickness. She told him about the dreams she had tucked away in a small wooden box. She told him how she missed the sound of the ocean. She missed the sweet floral smell of jasmine tea in the morning. It was a romance built on shared silence and the understanding of pain. It was the recognition of two souls who had been truly alone for far too long. The town of Bodie watched them with a mixture of confusion and begrudging respect. Some men called Silas a fool for loving a woman from a different world, but Silas had never felt more like a wise man in his entire life. By the time the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks in late October, Silas made a decision. He didn't ask her with a fancy diamond ring or a long rehearsed speech. He brought her a fresh bag of high-quality cornmeal, and he brought her a small hand-carved wooden box. Inside the box was a heavy iron key to the ranch house. "I can't offer you a life of luxury, Maylin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can offer you a home where you will never be invisible again. You won't have to cook for strangers who don't know your name. You won't have to hide in the shadows of a kitchen. You can bake your peace into our own bread every single morning." Maylin looked at the key. The last time someone had called her family, her mother had still been alive. Maylin closed her fingers around the cold iron key. Somehow, it felt warm. Then she looked at the man who had stood between her and the darkness. She realized that home wasn't a place on a map or a building of wood. Home was a person who made you feel safe enough to breathe. She packed her one small trunk. She carefully packed her torn purple silk dress. As they rode out of Bodie on Silas's sturdy wagon, the town seemed smaller. The high-altitude air felt less suffocating. The miners watched them go, some with envy and some with a strange sense of loss. The quiet cook was gone. The kitchen at Miller's Rest never smelled of peace again. They were married in the lush valley by a traveling preacher. The ceremony was held under the wide branches of a massive ancient oak tree. Maylin wore a new dress of deep violet silk, but she kept a small piece of her mother's torn dress tucked close to her heart. Silas built her a kitchen with 3 large, beautiful windows. They faced the sunrise every morning. He made sure she had all the honey and ginger she could ever want. Years passed, and the ranch became a sanctuary of warmth and laughter. They had 2 children who carried the best of both worlds, a girl with Maylin's intelligent eyes and a boy with Silas's steady hands. Maylin taught her daughter the secret of the golden cornbread. "Always put peace into the dough, my darling," she would say. "For the world is loud, and people are hungry for more than just food. They are hungry for kindness." The story of the rancher and the quiet cook became a legend in the valley. It was a story told to remind people that dignity is not given by laws. Dignity is a flame we carry within ourselves. And kindness is a bridge that can cross any distance, any culture, and any law. Silas and Maylin lived to see the gold mines of Bodie dry up. They saw the bustling town turn into a silent ghost. But their love remained as solid as the mountains that watched over them. In her final years, Maylin would sit on the porch and watch the eagles soar. She was no longer a ghost. She was the vibrant heartbeat of a family. She was the woman who had turned a simple piece of bread into a life of gold. And every time Silas tasted her cooking, he would close his eyes. He would thank God for the day he asked about the cornbread. He would thank God for the courage to see what others chose to ignore. It is the small things in life that lead us to our greatest treasures. Justice is not always found in a courtroom. Sometimes justice is found in a warm kitchen and a hand held tight. I hope this story reminded you that you are never truly invisible to the people who matter. Your value is not determined by the world's narrow eyes. If you enjoyed this journey back to 1882, please hit the like button. Share this story with someone who still believes kindness can change a life, and subscribe for the next tale of the Old West, where a mysterious locket from 1890 reveals a love that refused to die. Until next time, keep a kind heart and a warm home.